Hello, I am Enrique Quesada, and this is Mexico Centered, a podcast from the Mexico Center at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. On July 1st, 2018, Mexican voters went out to the polls to elect thousands of public officials. Among these, voters participated in the election of all 628 members of Congress, 8 governors, a mayor for Mexico City, and the next president of Mexico. The National Regeneration Movement, or Movimiento de Regeneración Nacional, better known by its acronym Morena, a party registered only 4 years ago, will be the largest political force in the country. Its founder, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, will take office as the next president of Mexico on December 1st. It's no secret that corruption in Mexico is rampant and therefore a salient issue in the minds of voters. According to the exit poll from El Financiero, about one-fourth of voters considered corruption to be the most important issue along with security. Out of the subgroup of voters, 63% voted for López Obrador. This suggests that in the eyes of the electorate, measures to curb corruption must be a priority for the new administration. This is not a surprise, since AMLO campaigned heavily on this issue, saying that he would combat corruption from the top down by setting an example of moral governance. I sat down with Paul Lagunes to discuss the role of transparency in fighting corruption, what steps are needed beyond ensuring better access to public information, and Mexico's corruption problem in a broader Latin American perspective. Paul Lagunes is the 2018 Board of Advisors Visiting Fellow at the Baker Institute. He is also an assistant professor at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. His research on the political economy of development examines the issues of corruption and primarily focuses on 2 questions. How does corruption actually work in practice, and what tools are available for limiting the harmful effects of corruption? Here's my conversation with Paul Lagunes. Paul Lagunes, thank you for being here in Mexico Center and welcome. I'm really excited to talk to you about corruption, although that sounds weird to be excited to talk about corruption, but there's certainly a lot to talk about here, especially because we seem to think of corruption in Mexico as 2 words that go very well together, unfortunately. And I just wonder if we seem to not be able to separate them much, how big is corruption in Mexico, especially if we compare it to other countries in the region?
Well, thanks for having me here, Enrique. It's a pleasure. And I think your question's very important. Mexico has historically had a corruption problem. Now, that's different to saying that Mexico is corrupt. And I want that little distinction is important to note, because a country is not corrupt. People are not corrupt. A country is weighed down by corruption, and people may participate in corruption. But I think that distinction allows us to think about corruption as something that can be done away with, that people under different circumstances may behave differently. So along those lines, I'd like to also recognize that Mexico is not corrupt or the problem of corruption is not the same throughout the country. There are some parts of the country that have very little corruption. Other parts of the country have much more. So I challenge that idea just because I want us to think about Mexico as a country that can eliminate the problem of corruption, that Mexico and corruption are not synonymous. Now, that being said, again, Mexico does have a serious corruption problem, and it's historical. When we see the region, if I can take a step back and think about the region, we see that this is a problem in the entire continent, or specifically in Latin America. For the past several years, or when we compare Latin America to other parts of the world, we see Latin America is actually one of the regions that's worse off in terms of corruption. Moreover, it's made no progress or no detectable progress on indicators. Within the region, where does Mexico stand? Well, it's not doing particularly well. Those countries that are doing well are Uruguay, Chile, Costa Rica. Then those who are doing particularly poorly are countries like Venezuela and Haiti. Mexico is more toward the middle, but it is below Peru, Colombia, Argentina, Bolivia, among a few others. So it's not doing particularly well in the region. I'm hopeful because I do think with there are policies and things that we can do to improve it so as to stop thinking of Mexico as synonymous with corruption.
So if we talk about those steps that Mexico has taken, After the historic election of 2000, where the PRI lost the presidency after 71 years of being in power, there have been reforms to be more transparent, to provide better access to public information. And yet, while this is a step in the right direction, it seems like it's not enough, because instead of seeing less corruption, it seems like we just learn about more and more corruption.
Yes. So Mexico actually has one of the best transparency laws out there. Its FOIA law, its Freedom of Information law, is one of the best in the world. It's, if you've ever used it, you'd know, because you submit a question and it actually works. You often do get the response in a timely fashion. So one of my PhD students, or a PhD student that I've worked with, Oscar Bocasangre at Columbia, he and I conducted this study on Mexico's FOIA system, and we found that a majority of information requests do get answered. This was an 8-year-long study where we probed federal agencies to see if they answered and the quality of the answers. And we saw that, yes, they tend to answer. Their answers, they don't necessarily answer all the questions, especially questions that they're not required to by law. But the amount of documentation and so on is not bad. So the law itself, in terms of the design, is one of the best. In terms of its functionality, in terms of the way the enforcement of the law, the application of the law, it's pretty good. And we have seen instances where the FOIA law in particular has been helpful in uncovering cases of corruption. It was helpful to David Barstow and Shanique von Bertrand, Alejandra Shanique von Bertrand, who reported on Walmart's corruption in Mexico, or alleged corruption in Mexico. Without FOIA, it seems they would not have succeeded in reporting that for the New York Times. We've seen a few other instances where FOIA has been powerful. And there have been these efforts for open government. We also see a free press. We also see a much more dynamic media, thanks to social media. So yes, we are in a different paradigm today where corruption is more evident. But as you're noting, Enrique, there's a paradox here. So there's more transparency, and yet we don't necessarily see less corruption. What's going on? Well, transparency is a necessary but not sufficient condition for lowering corruption. Transparency is helpful because only by detecting it could you actually confront it, but it's not sufficient. What's been missing is the confrontation. It's basically the prosecutorial side of things. And I know that one of your podcasts has touched on the issue of impunity, and that's, I think, the next challenge for Mexico. The next challenge for Mexico is to do as other countries have done in the region, in particular Brazil, and investigate, uncover the corruption, and then actually confront it in the judicial system. There's the case of the estafa maestra, which is, this very suspicious use of public funds and this leveraging of a loophole in the system. And then, you ask me, well, what's come of that? Maybe I've missed it, but I don't see enough of an effort to really. So civil society was fantastic in uncovering that scheme, and then I don't yet see government responding forcefully to that problem. So that's the missing element. This political will, if you will, it seems missing. Even though the 2016 elections served as a way for the people to communicate to government that they wanted corruption prioritized. It wanted government to take action against the corruption. So it's puzzling that the government didn't respond more forcefully.
So coming to the recent election that Mexico had on July 1st, I'm thinking also like another way in which information can work, and that is by voters punishing those corrupt politicians, right? By kind of raising the cost of corruption so that it's not attractive or as attractive, and I'm wondering how much it played a role, or how much we think it played a role, whether this was a mechanism that we see, because the PRI had a terrible result, and I think that corruption, was a salient issue in the electorate's mind, and it hurt the PRI, but it also helped the opposition. So with this better access to information, the electorate becomes more informed. and creates this higher cost. Do you think this accounts for the terrible result of the PRI, at least in part? And in which ways is this mechanism of the electorate punishing politicians not enough? Like, it seems like it's just once, in the case of the president, once every 6 years, that the electorate gets to do something with this information.
So let me take a step back, go regional for a moment again, and note that, yes, corruption was a priority in Mexico during these elections, and Mexico is not alone in that. So across the region, corruption is a hot topic. We have it in Argentina. We see that also in Peru. We see it in Colombia, in Brazil, and certainly in countries in Central America. So corruption has been a priority across the region. I'm not a survey expert, so I can't tell you what exactly explains the PRI's loss. It lost by quite a lot, and I can't quite explain it myself. I leave that to people who specialize on polling. But I wouldn't be surprised that corruption played a part in that. I do think that if corruption did play a role in the PRI's loss, I think then it's fair to say that the 2016 elections should have served as a warning, because it's speculated that's why the PRI had so many losses in those elections, and also there's this narrative that would help us that would make sense of this outcome based on corruption. We see that the PRI, the prosecution of El Bester Gordillo was not necessarily because of the corruption that was associated with her, but more as a political vendetta. So it seems like that's really what happened, because she was singled out when there were so many other options or other people that should also be prosecuted. Raúl Duarte, Cesar Duarte were major cases that came up. The government was not particularly quick in prosecuting Cesar Duarte, for example. We have instances that came up as well, other scandals that popped up, like La Estafa Maestra. We have the way the government has handled the Odebrecht case, which differs quite a lot from how other governments in the region have responded to the Odebrecht scandal. Peru has been very active in responding to evidence of corruption in the Odebrecht scandal, whereas Mexico has not been nearly as active. Brazil, the way Brazil has responded is extraordinary, and it goes back to the point of, okay, you uncover it and then you do something about it. So I think it fits the narrative that corruption is one good reason that the PRI lost this time around, and lost badly.
Right. So if we move forward to what's to come, Andrés Manuel López Obrador campaigned heavily on this issue of corruption, saying that through his good example, we would eradicate corruption, right, from the top down. It would start with him not being corrupt, and then not letting people below him be corrupt. And I'm thinking of I think there's several things here to talk about. But so this mechanisms, right, of having a good example at the top, and with that solving the issue, or even his administration being able to really monitor everyone and all of the people below him. I'm thinking whether this is enough to fight corruption.
So, a brief comment first on López Obrador's victory, if I may. I think some people see his victory with cynicism, and that cynicism is understandable. López Obrador is somebody who has said things in the past that I personally don't agree with. At one point he said, "To hell with your institutions." And again, I'm an institutionalist. I believe in institutions and building institutions, and not relying on leaders and people, but on the institutions. And when he says to hell with that, that's to hell with a lot of work that a lot of people put into building these institutions. So some people have reasons to see him and his victory with cynicism. But to them, I would suggest that they curb that cynicism. I don't think it's helpful. I think he needs to be given a chance. He won by an extraordinary margin. Over 50% of voters backed López Obrador. And that's not something to take lightly. And on the other hand, there are people who are se pusieron la camiseta. They're just all the way in with
Right.
López Obrador. And to them, I would invite them to be skeptical. At the end of the day, López Obrador is a politician, and he's surrounded by people that even if López Obrador himself remains honest, there are a lot of people around him that we need to keep an eye on. So I recommend to those who supported López Obrador to be skeptical. So to some, reduce your cynicism, and to others, raise your level of skepticism. In terms of López Obrador's suggestion that an honest leader does make a difference, I think so. I think the leader can help set the rules of the game of how we're going to play here. How is government supposed to function? I think the leader does that, or in a similar way as a police officer does that on a day-to-day basis toward the people, toward residents of a city. When you interact with a police officer, he is the face or she is the face of government. And however he or she behaves sets the tone, gives you an impression of how government should function or functions. So something similar with the president, a lot of attention, media attention goes on how the president acts. So depending on how he acts, how he will act in the next few years, will tell us what kind of how he's suggesting that the rest of government should work. So I do think there's something to that.
So I want to ask there, does that mean in terms of action, would it mean actually, let's say there's a case about corruption and actually seeing a result there in that we see a change in what's happening? I'm wondering whether the status quo is corruption, right? All these corrupt acts and politicians, and so you're going to get away with it, right? We see the levels of impunity as we talked in Mexico, and so you're like, I'll get away with this. But in López Obrador setting an example, not through words, but through actions, then we can change the story, and then I will be less inclined to be corrupt. Well,
I think one concrete example where I'd hope López Obrador can marcar la línea, can set the example, is there will be instances of corruption that are detected and found in his administration. I mean, it's to be expected, especially if prosecutors and investigators and the media and civil society are doing their job. It's going to happen. My question is, how is he going to respond? If he becomes defensive, and if he starts arguing that this is part of a plot, then he's going to lose me. I think I'm going to be disappointed. But if he takes those instances and reacts constructively, recognizes the mistake, recognizes the authorities need to prosecute and investigate, get all the evidence, take it into the judicial process, and really see whether there's blame to be set on the individual, then he'll be basically what he'll be communicating to society is impunity is no longer the rule of the game. That corruption is no longer tolerated, no matter if the person is part of his administration. So what I hope to see in López Obrador is, when an instance of corruption comes up in the near future, I want him to take a strong stance and encourage the authorities to investigate and take things to the last, take things to the end, find what they need to find, and decide what they need to decide.
So how can the new administration? I mean, we've been talking about this, but how can it join this group of countries of Uruguay, Chile, Costa Rica that we've said are doing well in terms of? I mean, the opposite, right? They're doing well because they don't have as much corruption. Can Mexico join this group? How can it join this part of the region?
So the case of Costa Rica has been studied by Bruce Wilson. And what he finds is that the case of Costa Rica is a complicated one. Getting to where it is today was a long process. And it was one where corruptions would come up and authorities would react, respond, policies would be implemented. So it was this gradual effort of institutional responses to corruption scandals. That's how Costa Rica got to where it is. Uruguay, Daniel Buquet has studied it, and that case is different. That case is one where corruption was not sustainable. It was the main corruption we saw there was patronage. So that patronage was a weight on the treasury, on the public treasury. So on the one hand, it wasn't sustainable. On the other hand, there was this new party that came into the scene, and it was not part of the corrupt status quo, and disturbed that status quo. And so that's how Uruguay broke free of that corrupt equilibrium. There's the case of Chile, the country in the region to have the first Comptroller General's office, which now dates many decades back. Chile is another complicated case where it wasn't always as clean as it is today. Chile now tops the list as one of the cleanest governments in the region, coming almost as clean as some of the OECD countries, as the wealthier countries in the world. And the way it got here was, again, long process. There was a period during Pinochet era where a lot of authority was concentrated and there were abuses. But after that, when democracy arrived, Chile made a lot of important strides and has made important strides in reducing corruption, in part thanks to the Contraloría General. Brazil, you have a country where the judiciary is working extraordinarily well, in my opinion. And we see that again in how it's responded to Lava Jato. You have people like Sergio Moro, Deltan Dall'Agno, that's a judge and a prosecutor who are heading the investigations and who are really taking people to jail that need to be in jail. So that's my hope from Mexico. My hope is that Mexico will need to follow its own path, build on the strengths that it already has, the transparency that it has. But one thing that you can't get away from, that's true in all these other instances or examples that I provided, is that Mexico needs to prosecute and investigate. For that, it needs to arm prosecutors and investigators with sufficient independence and resources. And again, the politician at the top, the president, needs to support them, needs to provide the political will for these investigators and prosecutors to do their job.
So in concluding here, you would say that Mexico has to get really good steps in this transparency laws and access to information, but we need this political will to actually create this independent judiciary. And it sounds to me like this national anti-corruption system where civil society is asking for an independent prosecutor there, and it's not clear whether this is going to happen.
Right, and that's, I think, something I've left out that I shouldn't leave out, is the role of civil society in Mexico. I've talked about how Mexico's transparency system is quite strong. I've also, I think, mentioned how Mexican media, the news is quite good and free, in spite of the threats on reporters that they face on a daily basis. But the other strength that Mexico should build on is civil society. We are where we are today with the Sistema Nacional Anticorrupción, the national anti-corruption system, thanks to civil society. We have a transparency law that's as strong as it is thanks to civil society. So I'm hopeful. Here's another point I'm hopeful for. López Obrador at times has not given his support, has not vocalized his support of certain elements of civil society. At one point, I think he called them sociedad civil fifi, civil society that is the elite of some sort. Right. And he said that in a ironic manner, not particularly, didn't come across as supportive of civil society. Right. And I hope he changes on that front. I think we need to support civil society. Again, this is a part of Mexico that we should build on, that Mexico can move to a less corrupt equilibria thanks to an active and vigilant civil society.
Well, I'm going to share your optimism in thinking that we are taking some good steps, and hopefully we'll continue in that direction. Paul Lagunes, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thanks so much.
That was Paul Lagunes. That is it for this episode. Thank you for listening to Mexico Centered. Thanks to Lisa Huacata, our program manager, and to Tony Payan, the director of the Mexico Center at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. You can visit our website at bakerinstitute.org/Mexico and check out our Elections Resource Center. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host and do not necessarily reflect those of the Mexico Center. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can email us at mexicocenter@rice.edu. We would love to hear from you. Mexico Centered is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and Radio Public. You can subscribe through your favorite podcast app to receive all of our new episodes directly on your phone. I am Enrique Quesada. I will see you next time.